Hey, welcome to Ginger Snapshots. Hey, this week I want to talk about the lighting I use, Godox lighting. So if you're looking at, should I buy some Godox lighting, this is a good episode. So when I first started out, I'm trying to buy all of my equipment. And I've talked about my experiences as starting out. I started out with video, and I used video lights, and then I switched to strobe lighting. And the first thing I bought was, well, I should say this, the first thing I bought to go with my Panasonic G9, because that's what I started with, was this little Godox flash. It's a TT350, and when you buy those, you always want to pay attention to the last little thing and say, like this one here is TT350S because it goes with my Sony camera. I also have one that's a TT350O, which goes with Olympus or Panasonic cameras. So you just have to look at which model you're buying. But this was the first thing I bought, and I used it, and it worked okay. It is not as much power as I wanted, and especially if you put it in, you can only go so far away, and at the same time it was enough power. I mean, you can do like headshots and things like that, smaller portraits with just a flash, and I actually, they make a bigger one. My daughter does wedding photography, and she has one that's bulkier, that it's still similar to this, but this is what I started with, and I still use it to some degree because I use it for a fill light. I can mount it up on, I have a little hook that I have on my beams in my studio that I can use it for a hair light. But when I first started doing newborns, I bought this, and so this served a purpose to be a fill light, and I actually would just point it at the ceiling, and it was just enough to bounce back down and fill in the shadows a little bit from this. So this is it. When I first started out, I looked at what other newborn photographers were using, and a lot of them were using Pulse buff equipment, which was Alien B, Digi B, and Einstein. And Einstein was like the best. It was like the Cadillac of the Pulse buff equipment, and a lot of them were using it. And it's one of those things that a lot of them were using it in a way that it made you feel like, oh, well, that's the thing to use. You're just kind of wrong if you don't. But I didn't settle with that, and I wanted to look into and investigate and kind of study it out and look at what I could use. Newer brand is another one that you can buy that's inexpensive. But I didn't feel real good about that, and I don't have a Newer. I have my tripod as a Newer. I have some other things like that, but I don't have any lights that are from Newer. So that's a very budget option, and there are a few people that I know that use it for newborns. Westcott is a very good name. I think there were some professionals. I remember even, I watch professional videos or professionals in YouTube videos, and I'm paying attention, scoping out what equipment they're using. So Westcott was some that like Anna Brandt was using, and some people like that I follow. And so I know that's a really good name because there's, people wouldn't waste their money on it otherwise. And I do have a friend that uses Westcott, and she seems to do really great. And if you look at her pictures, her lighting's perfect. So she's really worked well with that brand and with getting her lighting set. So at the time, so I think I've said this, I don't know if I'm repeating myself or not, but at the time I'm trying to buy all my equipment, buy my light stands, my light modifiers, and preparing to build this studio. So I didn't have an extra $700-800 to buy an Einstein, even though that's what everybody thought. So when I researched it, and even to this day I've looked at it, and from what I can see and what I've determined is that it's good quality and it's going to last a long time. And so you may spend $700 or $800, but you're not going to be spending that again, in a couple years. It's going to last for years. At the same time, from everything that I've researched, there's nothing wrong with Godox. Now, I've had one person that I've talked to that said that they switched from Godox to Einstein, and it was a total game changer. And I would be curious to kind of sit down with her and really see what the differences were. But she feels like it, and I would think, well, that was what you started with. Is it because you got better? Did you get it better? And, but she feels like it was a big game changer for her. So I will say this: when you're using lighting, if you're concerned about the light, the temperature, because that's a lot of questions I have from other photographers. You're using Godox, well, do you have to play with your color temperature? And not that I know of. I set my camera to have, you know, the white balance to flash, and I've never had any problems since then. Since I started doing all white with the newborns, I've set a custom white balance, and that actually has worked perfect. I actually love that. So you always have that option, and I don't know if people are having trouble and then they switch to a different brand of lights, and it's because the light. My Godox lighting is very consistent, so I would say, you know, if you're outside and it's in the shade or it's sunny or you're indoors, you're always going to be having to adjust your settings on your camera, and that's just part of being a photographer. So for me, it's always been very consistent, and I've not had to change my white balance. Like I said, I use flash, and then I have a custom white balance that I use for when I'm doing the white in the studio, all white. But flash normally works for this, and if I have to change it and create a custom white balance, I do. It depends on a lot of different things. But when I'm shooting in the studio, I have, like right now, I have the overhead lights off, and I just use this. When I'm setting my ISO at 100, my shutter speed usually 250, my aperture is about 2.8, 3.2, something right in there normally, unless I'm doing families. And so I have consistency in what I'm shooting, and then I have consistency in my settings. So the first one I bought because of money, and I did not want to, and I really didn't have $800 extra at that time. I went ahead and bought this Godox SK400II, and this was $139. This one I believe I bought off Amazon actually, and so it came with a whole little kit. I don't want to put too much light that way. Let me turn the model light off. Okay, so it came with a little kit that you have gels that you can switch out, barn doors. It's got another grill that you can put on it, some different grids. So I've got different accessories that came with it, and that was included in the kit. And it still was $139. Now you know, everything has went up so much since COVID that I'm sure it's cost more now, but at the time it was $139. So I was looking at $139, give it a shot, or $700, and that's what I chose to do. And so you can tell it's very bulky. It's heavy, and I actually have this one. This is my biggest one. It's the 400. I have it on this huge light stand because this light stand is so heavy, and I don't want to ever take a chance on it tipping over. But that is one of the drawbacks, and it is corded, so I have to always keep it plugged in to use it. It has a model light, so you can set that to off or prop, which is a little bit lower, or at 95% power. And it's a light bulb, and I have broke those moving them, so I've had to buy them, and they're like, I don't know, $8 to replace it, and that's not a big deal. So I don't know if I can take that off there for you to see. So right there in the middle is that light bulb, and that light bulb is what I've broke several times because it sticks out and I'm just clumsy. And then the circle light is the actual light that you use for, you know, to take the strobe light, but that provides a strobe model light for you, and that one does get hot, so you have to be careful with that. So this was my first light, and it worked great, and really that's kind of with it and the flash, that was all I was using at first, but I started to struggle somewhat to get it was too bright. So when I was using, I had switched out. First I had the 7-foot PLM. So this right here is my 64-inch PLM, and I started out with a bigger one because that's what most newborns do use. And you know, when you start out new and you're just trying to experiment with everything, you kind of go with what other people use. But my space was so small, I was knocking into everything, so I had to go down to the 64-inch. And you go down to the 64 and the light spreads a little bit less, and it was just too bright. So I did get this one here. It's a 300, and this one's the 400 watt. So it's a little bit less power, but this one it's almost as bulky, not quite. It is a little bit smaller, you can tell, but it still has to be corded. It has to be plugged in. It has the model light with it as well. Now all of these Godox lightings, including the flash. Now if you just have the flash on your camera, you're not going to have to worry about it. But as soon as you start, we can get that to come on. As soon as you start, using multiple lights, you're going to have a trigger. And even these that are not on your camera, you're going to have a trigger. And so I had to get, the Godox offers 2 models. Okay, I should say they offer 2 sizes because, again, this here is for the Sony. So it's, it's the X Pro S for Sony. I also have the X Pro O for the Olympus Panasonic brands. But that was one thing that they automatically sync, and I didn't have to buy a third piece of equipment. And so for me, I shoot in high speed sync, and this one here is the Pro. The other one's a little bit smaller, but I chose the Pro because you can look at all 4 lights at one time. So you can have a lot of different lights hooked up to it, but like A, B, and another one is C, and the flash is D, and things like that. And you can actually control it and turn it right here on your trigger. There's a lot of good videos out there about triggers. I don't know that I want to go into a whole lot with it. Mine works, and I've got it set. And from time to time, if I knock it off the settings, I have to look some information up because it's just not something that I change hardly ever because I've got it working and it works well. So when I needed a little bit less, I invested in the AD200. So the Godox AD200 Pro, I can't remember exactly all the pieces that made it be the Pro versus the not. I got this too close, I'm sorry. This comes with a nice little suitcase, and you have different options. So you can buy a lot of different options that I haven't taken the time to. So this is a bare bulb, and what happens is you can just slide that off there and replace it. It also comes with a Fresnel head one. This one has the model light, and I do like to use that one for that reason, and I like to use it when I'm traveling with it because it just, you're not going to get it bobbed. Like I broke this so many times, I don't want to take a chance on breaking this. So when I'm when I'm in the studio and I have it in my other umbrella, this gives a bigger light spread, I believe, so that's what I use. It has a battery. This just pops out, and it comes with a little charger and everything. I will say that battery lasts so long. I never have had a trouble with the battery running out unless it was my fault that I didn't charge it for the last 3 weeks or something. You know what I'm saying? You do have to keep them charged. I've heard other photographers that didn't use it for a long period of time and the battery died. So you don't ever want to get to where you actually let the battery die because it does ruin the battery. But again, this depending on the flash head you use, you can have a model light for it. But when I switched to it, because when you're doing newborns and you've got this big light that's 3 feet from them, you need a softer light. And this was perfect for the newborns. And actually, that's what I use now that I'm in my big studio. I use the 7-foot PLM by Paul Seepoff. So I do use something from Paul Seepoff, and I use that, and it's easier because you've got that huge 7-foot umbrella and you're moving it around and you don't have to worry about a cord. So with this, it is harder because when you lug this around, you're watching where the camera is or where the cord is, and and like I said, I have this on a huge light stand because I don't want to ever take a chance on it being tipped. The other one, the only reason I don't want it to be tipped is because I don't want to break the bulb because it's really not going to do any damage otherwise because it's so lightweight. But this one works perfect. And the other reason, so this one's 400, this one's 300. So you at full power, this one's going to be more. This one's only 200. So this one is actually a Flashpoint, which is Adorama's. It's Adorama making Godox. It's really a Godox light, and they've slapped their name on it, and you maybe get it about $20 cheaper, I don't know. But this one's a 300 and this one's a 400. This works perfect with the Godox trigger, so Flashpoint, it's really basically the same thing. It's a generic name, or it is its own name, I don't know, but it's essentially as a Godox lighting. So but here's the thing about the AD200 the reason I like it the most is because you can take the power down. The lowest you can go for these are 1/16 of a power, and you cannot go any lower. So that's it. And that was what my problem was with trying to do the newborn. I couldn't go any lower. So I get this 200 Pro, and you could go down to 1/256 power. So you're going down 32, 28, all of this, and you go down. Sometimes I've even used it at 128. I very rarely use it at 256. For the newborns, normally it's at 132nd power. So that's still, I'm going down half of what this one would go down. And so that's why I switched to this. So this is what I will say. I'll try to summarize everything that I've said. I started out with Godox because it was budget friendly. But I've been very happy with it. And my future plans are not really to go out and buy an Einstein. Maybe someday I'll try the Westcott. But right now I'm happy with this, and I know a lot of photographers now. At the beginning of my time in photography, I really didn't know that a lot of people were using that Paul C. Buff, but now I've met a lot of people that are using the Godox and they love it, and they wouldn't go in with anything else. And so, you could say, well, if this goes out in a couple years, aren't you going to be upset? And I'm like, well, I only paid $139 for it. So that's kind of the way I look at it. So yeah, you've got your choice, but this one here is 3 years old, and I've never had any problems with it except for me breaking the bulb, and that's my fault. But it does really well for me. And my future plans are to get an AD200, 400, and I don't know that I would ever use a 600. Maybe if I start doing some group shots outside where I need to outpower the sun, maybe get a 600. But in this small studio that I have, the 14 by 28, I don't need anything higher than a 400 right now. So my next purchase will probably be the AD200, and all that is kind of this one going up another 100 watts and giving me a little bit more power, but still keeping the battery. So I hope that's been helpful. You want to make sure if you're going to use this off-camera flash, you're going to have to get a trigger. And some, like the Einstein, there's another piece of equipment, and I've forgot it, the transmitter. Sometimes you have to get the trigger, and you have to connect a transmitter to the camera or the light. You're trying to coordinate all those, I believe, and transmitter to the camera. But with me, it's built in, so you don't have to worry about those. So you don't have an extra cord hanging down for the transmitter. The trigger and the light just work flawlessly, and that's been my experience. That when I'm syncing all of these, and I'm doing a group portrait in here, like my family's in here, and I have like 3 lights and maybe the flash for an extra one from behind. They all go off perfectly, flawlessly, and I've never had any trouble. So that's why I just don't think I would switch. Yes, I did start out with because it was budget, and honestly, I don't have an AD400 because of the price. You start getting into the battery operated ones, it no longer really is a budget option. They're still, you're still getting, you're still paying more. But I've never had any problems. I love using Godox, and I've never had any trouble with the white balance as long as I have my camera settings correct. And I think that's it for this week. If you got any questions, please hit me up. I'm going to try to remember to read those comments because I've learned that you can't really read those comments from your phone. So you have to go onto a PC or a Mac and you see those comments. But I appreciate those comments. So if you're thinking about Godox, I say go for it. You can't beat the cost, and get the trigger, and I would say get the X Pro because everything just works flawlessly. So I hope you have a happy Labor Day. See you next week.